I'm JJ Perez from Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca from the San Antonio Express News coming to you on Monday following UTSA's Week 8 loss to rival North Texas. Greg, not your ordinary loss, a lopsided affair in North Texas's favor, 55-17. I want to talk a little bit about the actual gameplay because I feel like this thing kind of got out of hand a little bit early before we kind of jump into, you know, the state of the program. But what happened in this game? Was it just that, middle eight in the second quarter, early third quarter barrage there, and that was kind of it?
I mean, it certainly felt like UTSA was in it up until that point, but there were just so many different things that went wrong that it's hard to highlight one specific area. I have, I guess, four that come to mind immediately is the penalties, put
Yep.
them behind the sticks a couple times and wiped out potentially good plays. You look at the offensive side, the drops I think were killer. There was two or three potential first down pickups that were derailed by drops, and that's on top of one or two that get set back by penalties and things like that. And then Owen McCown's accuracy was not where it needed to be. He missed some easy throws and a couple potential. I mean, I talked a couple weeks ago about I thought his favorite pass is that one up the sideline with the fake screen, and he missed a gimme touchdown to Patrick Overmeyer on one of those. So maybe I was wrong about that. And then on defense, it all comes down to tackling. I think that
Yeah.
was we saw as many missed tackles as PFF had them with 22 missed tackles, which is the
Wow.
most since they had 22 against Texas State last year in that disastrous game, and then they had 27 against Texas in like 3 years ago. Like that's the most that they've had in a very long time. So not quite the school record that Jeff Traylor said it was, but pretty close. So yeah, those are the ones that I highlight. Just that, and between all that, it just kind of fell apart.
Let's look at the penalties, right? It didn't feel like they were the normal pen. Like there were a lot, right? I think they got flagged for 10, and there were a few others that, you know, got negated for whatever reason. But it always feels like there's a handful of maybe like, 50-50 plays, but some of these penalties were like during really critical moments of the game. There's one that negated turnover, right? And
Yeah.
and I think one at the end of the game where they scored, or maybe I don't know if I'm remembering. The whole game kind of mashed together, but it felt like there were like four or five that were like very critical turning point turnovers.
Yeah, there was the one at the end that you're talking about. I think is probably the play that they actually it ended up getting declined. There was
Right.
a
Yeah.
fourth and four, and they jumped off sides, so that could have been 11. But yeah, fourth and four, they jump off sides, and so they give up the long touchdown pass on the free play. The game was really long decided at that
Yeah.
point. I thought the ones that stood out to me the most were the first drive. Either it's the with between the first two drives, one of them had a false start that put them behind the sticks and they couldn't convert, and then one of them had a block in the back on a screen pass to the perimeter that put them behind the sticks and they couldn't convert. And then you just saw some weird plays. Like Jamie and Buxton got called for a holding,
Yeah.
like defending a screen pass, and it was like a 10-yard holding. Like, yeah, I don't know. You just never see a guy hold another guy. Like I guess he used it to like kind of recover and regain his momentum. And you mentioned the interception by Ty and Milton, I believe. I couldn't tell. I don't think they announced the number, but
Right.
there was a defensive holding. You can see it a little bit if you when you watch that playback. So it's not like the calls were bad. They just were extremely costly at the time that they popped up. And UTSA had started the year really good on the penalties front after we spent a lot of time last year talking about how much of an issue it was. And they spent the whole offseason talking about discipline and how things were going to be different in that sense. And it showed through the first couple weeks of the season. But if you just look at the penalties game by game, they were pretty good against Temple. But other than that, like 3 out of the last 4 weeks, they've been close to a season high, like 9 or 10 penalties for 70 or 80 yards, somewhere in that range. So it's kind of becoming an issue again where it seemed like they had buttoned it up.
Let's talk about the play of the offense as a whole. We saw Robert Henry break free for two long runs, the literal first play of the game. And it seems like, oh wow, UTSA is here to play. But the penalties, the mistakes, whenever UTSA gets behind the chains, when they have like a negative play or a penalty or something that sets them back, it's really hard for them to convert, especially when you have, sometimes Owen will be accurate, sometimes he won't, and then you'll have a good ball, and then there was a drop. I think there were a few, first down drops that were big in this game, and it's like there's just no margin of error. The margin of error is probably zero at this point, and when you add in those mistakes, things like that just compound. And I guess we could start with Owen McCown. I think he only had 87 yards of offensive passing production, and that's just not enough.
Yeah, I really am at a loss for words to try to explain what has happened to him from last year to this year because he just doesn't look like the same player. Where, I mean, we've seen in this game, he bounced that like screen pass to Devin McEwen that was just free. And the pass to Overmeyer is one he should hit for a long gain. And it just feels like there's a few plays a game where he's so far off too. And it's like I don't even know who he was throwing the ball to in that scenario. And so it's just bizarre because we've seen him be an accurate passer. And if there was one thing we criticized him on last year, it was sort of like the decisions, getting guys in the right situation, maybe what he's reading on the RPOs and all that's speculative on our end anyway. That's not even definitive criticism, but it's just, this year it's just the actual execution of the throwing that we wouldn't expect to be an issue. And that's why we've talked about it before. I keep going back to if there's some kind of injury. I actually thought he moved pretty well in this game. I was keeping an extra eye on him after he got hit. How quickly did he get up, and what did he look like jogging off the field? And he did not seem physically limited in this game. Maybe he's just hiding it really well, but I don't know how else to explain the drop off in just his overall passing ability from one year to the next. Do you see anything that's different or that's led to this?
I I will say it seemed like coming out of the last game he may have been banged up, and I watched him very close in pregame warmups. I even shot a video. I don't know if it went through because cell service at the stadium
Yeah.
was sketchy, but I spent that whole rain delay kind of watching everybody, and you're right. I mean, he looks the same. He always kind of has like a hitch in his giddy up a little bit when he's walking or jogging, but the mechanics appear to be the same. I'm not a quarterback expert, but you're right. Just some of the throws, I don't know what it is, and I just don't know if they've exhausted kind of everything to this point of the season to try and get his accuracy and production to where it needs to be, because they certainly appear to have tried different things to get the passing game going in the last, 3 or 4 games. And outside the first half against Rice, I don't know that we could say that anything's really worked that well.
What's crazy to me is last year he was the only part that felt like it was working, because the offensive line, we were questioning how well they could hold up. And this year they've been a lot better. They gave up a couple sacks in this game, but generally they've been pretty strong this year. The running game wasn't always there last year. We were talking about what's wrong with this group of running backs that we thought was going to be super elite, and they're just not all that productive. And this year we've seen what Robert Henry can do. We saw what Will Henderson can do in this game. They have surprisingly good rushing stats for this game, and it wasn't garbage time either. They were just efficient when they ran the ball. And we talked about the receivers group last year. It felt like they were pretty elite. And this year coming back, we thought that they'd be at a pretty high level too. And now we've seen some drops pop up. So I guess that's the only other area you could point to that has maybe fallen off. But it was like last year Owen was carrying the offense, and now he's the biggest issue in why it's not clicking at a high level, which is just something I never would have expected coming into the year.
Let's talk about the play of the defense. You mentioned the tackles. I mean, I think Jeff Traylor maybe said it best in the post game, which was a really interesting post game. I want to touch on a little bit here, but North Texas, I thought ran the ball shockingly well into what appeared to be light boxes. It felt like UTSA might have had this thing schemed correctly. They just couldn't get the guys down
Well, yeah, that's what I was keeping an eye on early because we've talked about UTSA's cornerback depth and how much they lack there. And against a team that can play 4-4 or even five wide
vertical.
receivers on a
Yeah.
given play, you would think that UTSA might need to get more defensive backs on the field. And what does that look like? But I think most of the game they played two corners and maybe two corners and a nickel, but it was basically their base defense. And so I'm thinking if you're playing your base defense against a team that spreads the field and your base defense is usually pretty good against the run, then you should have a numbers advantage near the line of scrimmage and you should be able to stop the run against this team. But they just weren't. It looked North Texas ran the ball as if UTSA was playing 6 or 7 defensive backs, and that's not
Right.
what it was. They just won all those matchups. So I did think that was pretty surprising because we knew North Texas has the ability to run the football. I mean, last time I compared this game a lot to the 2021 game because. Well, A, it was a disaster, but B, it also rained and North Texas ran the ball really well and UTSA lost 3 fumbles. All those things are parallel
Yeah.
across 2 games. And so we've seen before where North Texas can run the ball, and that's a part of their offensive identity, despite sort of the reputation as the spread air raid pass happy team. But this to be able to do it at this level with the way the defense was aligned is not how I expected that this would play out.
Yep. An absolute, you alluded to the turnovers. Three turnovers in the third quarter by UTSA, an absolute disastrous third quarter where we see North Texas outscore UTSA 21-3. I think 31-3 overall in the second half. Just really, the Roadrunners had nothing. There was a few things that went right for the offense early in the game, but outside of those handful of plays, just really nothing went well this week for the Roadrunners.
Yeah, I have to get into my research and look at the third quarters in particular. I mean, I could tell you they've been bad this year. I know that the scoring there is not going to reflect very well, but I wonder how it compares to previous seasons because I think that's the when people are upset about the coaching, I think that's a big thing that's easy to point to. And one that I look at too is how do they come out of halftime? Because we've actually seen, and this happened again in this game, the scripted part of the offense, the first couple drives, once again, looks pretty good. And then once they start having to make these adjustments or counter adjustments, it seems like, especially coming out of halftime, that some of these teams have been able to get away from them.
We both got to chat with Jeff Traylor after the game. I think I would describe that as hot as you will see a Jeff Traylor, in a setting in that manner. What were your some of your big takeaways in that conversation we had with him in the tunnel after this one?
Yeah, he was certainly so distressed about the state of things and upset about the way the game had played out. It was nice that the hostility wasn't directed at us for a change, so that was good. Usually even if things are going well, we might be the target, but really it was about he was agreeing with us more often than
Yeah.
not on the things we were asking and going with us on, and not really pushing back against well, actually, it's like this. It was, yeah, this is an issue and we have to try to figure it out. So, whether it was the idea of this being one of, he had said there were two games where they hadn't showed up, and that was against Texas State last year and North Texas in 21, the game that we talked about. And this is now a third one on that list. And just generally some of the issues that we've seen in the offense. He still is pretty protective of Owen, and I think that's just sort of the coach quarterback dynamic. He looked at the drops first and he looked at the penalties first. He didn't really say anything critical of Owen and his accuracy. I think that's, and to some extent it goes without saying, there's not really much that's served by piling on there. But the tackling, obviously, he was pretty straightforward. What was your reaction to his comments?
Yeah, I do want to just say, as much as for me, it's nothing personal, right? I know you take a lot of the stuff he tells us with a grain of salt, but I feel like most of the times he talks through us to get a message to either his staff or his players or his fans or maybe even some of his donors, right? I do think some of that is intentional in the way he answers questions and says things. And I think the biggest thing is I mean, he didn't criticize his coaching staff, but I mean, it was as close as what we've seen from him from doing that, right? So I would,
Yeah, he said the coordinators had, I think it was bad plans. Bad might have been the adjective. And he said it didn't work, so the coordinators didn't do a good job. He's sort of been, I don't know if he felt like it was a huge departure from the messaging he usually sends, but
right.
it's been taken that way. And in
Yeah.
writing, it looks that way a little bit. And he has sort of just said anytime anything goes wrong, it's everybody's fault kind of thing, but it
Yeah.
starts with him. Like that's that message, which was sort of the overall bottom line of that, was pretty similar, but certainly a little more colorful maybe in how we got there.
Yeah, and I just do think he likes to present it'll be interesting that I don't know if we'll have any radio stuff this week because it's the bye week. I know we're going to talk to him Wednesday. We'll see how much of that is kind of still the same messaging, right? Because I do think a lot of people, watch the videos and kind of look for how his body language and his tone and to go from very controlled reserve 2 or 3 weeks ago to as hot as I think we've ever seen him. I think is a reflection of like how bad this was, right? And that what we saw this week and what I call it the biggest game of the year up to this point was just a dud is not acceptable, right? So what's your take on what happens after this, Greg?
Yeah, I somebody asked me on the way up if I thought this was a must-win game for UTSA, and I said no, essentially, because if
Right.
they go 1-2 in this stretch, and then they can close strong with the at Charlotte and the East Carolina and the Army, and
Right.
they win those three, then you're fine. But
It's
now,
how it's how
yeah,
you lost this game.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's how is disastrous to the point that I actually do think that now having Temple or having Tulane come in here in a week and a half is going to be enormous because if they can win that game, if they can right the ship and prove that they can get it done against that team, which at this point it looks like you better win your home games because they said they've lost 7 straight conference games on a row and they've been really, really good in the Alamo Dome. So if you can win that game as UTSA, you're probably not going to go to South Florida and win, given the state of that team and also the road record we just touched on. And then if you can close strong and you can still get to where does that put you 6-6?
Yeah.
Then or that would even be 7-5. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're in range of still, a lot of people are saying, this is going to be a losing season, no bowl game. I'm not quite ready to go there just because we've seen how quickly they can look like a completely different team around into form, even just compared to how they played against Rice. Like I know Rice is nothing special, but to beat anybody that badly is pretty significant. And it just looked different. You can tell that that's a team that can play at a pretty high level and could pull off a strong finish here. But if they lose the Tulane game and then now you're going to USF at 3-5, then it starts to look pretty bleak. And they could
Right.
still have a heroic, let's get to 6-6 kind of thing down the
Yeah.
stretch. But then you start putting yourself in real danger zone of having a kind of disastrous season that changes the way people look at the program where they survived the 3-5 start last year because they finished strong. Like it didn't really ding UTSA's overall reputation too heavy. But I think if
Yeah.
you have an actual losing season and it starts with that Tulane game next week where to have that home invincibility shattered would be a big turning point.
Yeah. I don't know if there's just like at some it would almost feel like you make change to for the sake of making the change, right? Like what are we actually talking about? The person who actually calls the offensive plays, if you're changing that, who are you going to change to right now, right? The same thing with the defense. Who's on the staff there that you want calling the plays instead of the person calling them now, right? So I wouldn't be surprised either way if there's a change, either not to change or to change. But I do think if it feels like one more, I was gonna say win or lose, the Tulane game was gonna be the next game of the year because that's obviously as much of a turning point of where this season goes as what North Texas was, right? If you could find a way to get that, then you're right. You can maybe get some momentum and have a really good season. But if you don't, then it's looking like, wow, every other game on this schedule may not be, in fact, winnable. So it's a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers. Greg, just off the cuff, is there anybody currently on the staff who is better than who they have calling the plays now?
Yeah, I couldn't
Yeah,
possibly know that. But like,
right.
to your point, this was the first game where I felt like this year was worse than last year, just because we've been talking about that week after week as the different panic levels have hit the fan base of just, I don't know. I look at what happened last season and think that if they can recover from that, they can recover from this. But they didn't take a loss this lopsided this late in the year. There were a lot better signs at this point. But again, I think that the parallel of the Memphis game last year could be the Tulane game this year, and they can still have a season that people feel all right about. But now we're running out of opportunities for that. You,
Yeah,
you actually
clock's
have to
ticking.
jump up
Yeah,
and do it. So in terms of making a change, Coach Traylor was pretty, I don't know if animated's the right word,
definitive.
emphatic, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitive is what I was looking for. Just that like that's not happening in
yeah,
within the season. I don't it would be hard to say what he said then and then a week or two later do it. So and I also don't think that he thinks that's a problem. That's sort of guesswork, but it doesn't. I don't think that when they go back and review it, they're going to say the biggest things that went wrong are these coordinators, and we need to change that. I think those guys still get the benefit of the doubt internally for what they've done in previous seasons, being a part of the success that this program has achieved, and feeling like they can get back there because they've done it before. And so I can't, that's like, you can't say everybody who has a good year one or two times gets their job forever, right? I understand that. But I do think that internally they're probably giving those guys a much longer runway than the fan base is willing to. And, if they made the change when everybody said they should last year, that might not have recovered as well as it did. Like, I think Jeff Traylor's probably emboldened, if anything, by the way last season played out down the final stretch to once again stick to his guns and hope that they can recreate that this year. Then you have to ask yourself, is salvaging 7-5 2 years in a row an acceptable outcome, and I don't, that's something the fans have to sort of decide. But generally, people came away from last year feeling pretty encouraged. So perhaps the vibes would be the same if they do a similar turnaround this year. But again, they have to do it. I'm giving them a lot of benefit of the doubt just because I've seen it before and they've been good historically since Jeff's been here. But they actually have to go out and do that, or else it's all kind of a moot point.
Where I guess they have not been good in recent history is these road games. And I think you and I are on the same page where it's kind of unexplainable on why there is such a sharp contrast. I know they've played some good teams on the road, but they've also played some not good teams on the road and lost against them. And I don't know how that has gotten to where it's gotten. I think I think 23 was their last conference road
Yeah,
win.
against North Texas, I believe, ironically enough. So yeah, I don't know if it's about. I'd be curious to maybe something I need to do this week is look at if that missed tackle number is a little bit different on the road versus at home, or just if those like third quarter, second half stats are a little different when with
Maybe
the ability
turnovers.
to.
Feels like turnovers, maybe.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from the perspective of being able to sustain energy, play at a high level through 4 quarters without the crowd behind you, that kind of thing. But it is it maybe if you take a closer look at it, there's something I'm not seeing, but it does not feel like when they go on the road, X part of the game doesn't go well, or they're not
Yeah.
as good at Y, or you know what I mean? Like it just feels like an um, overall lower performance level that just leads to these outcomes that we've been seeing.
Well, the Roadrunners are now officially, I think, in the bottom third of the conference, looking their way up. Greg, I'll just put it out there. Do you think UTSA needs to make a change in some kind of coaching decisions or who or how they structure things to try and right this ship here in the middle of the season?
I would say no, but I guess I'm sort of still thinking from the perspective of they're just not going to.
Yeah.
E- So I don't really know what it accomplishes as long as this season is still if they end up falling out of bowl eligibility and there's a couple weeks left and you want to try something else because you're certain it's not going to work and you need to quiet the revolt and help your recruiting potential by showing that you're willing to adjust and things like that. But I don't think that immediately at three and
That's a
four
bump.
that they're
Yeah.
going to do that. If everything goes wrong the next couple weeks and they get to 3-6, then maybe, but they'd probably have to have some disastrous loss at Charlotte and get to 3-7, and then certainly you would see something change. And that's sort of projecting, but I think that's what it would take for a midseason change. I don't think that's in Jeff Traylor's DNA. Do you think they need to?
I don't know that they need to. I don't know that they will. Certainly, I I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen Jeff that upset after a
Hmm.
game, even in the other two kind of blowout losses. So it wouldn't be a surprise, but I do not think they need to, or really they should. I think they believe that, they're a handful of plays away from this thing turning around, and that's an outlier. And if they could have a big game in 10 days against Tulane, they're gonna just try and, continue to chop wood and work on it.
Well, hold on. So you said it wouldn't be a surprise. Like if we go do interviews Wednesday and Jeff says X coach or analyst is now our offensive coordinator, you wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised just based on what we heard from him
Huh.
on Saturday.
Okay. I still would be pretty surprised.
Yeah.
It just seems like the level of commitment that he's shown to Burke and to the whole staff, which I guess is just sort of what you have to do. But
Right.
I don't know. It just seems like it doesn't. I
I
think it's
wouldn't be surprised if there's nothing
right.
until it actually happens either until further into the season too. So
To me, the most likely outcome is that nobody's title changes and maybe somebody starts doing something different.
yeah,
Whether it's actually the within the game calls, somebody else is
yeah.
just making them, or if
The
it's
game plan.
the way that because like they've told us this before and they mentioned it again last week. Basically, the staff works together to say these are the calls on third and short versus third and medium versus third and long, and here's our first down calls, and here's our medium down and distance and all. So they work cumulatively to cobble it together through the week, and then they make it sound like once game day gets there, it's already sort of decided. The guy who actually calls the plays is working from a very limited menu that they've already worked out. And so there's not a whole lot of artistry that goes into that, is sort of how they explain it. Now, whether that's accurate or not is another point. But if that's the structure, then it would just be, do you take different voices for different parts of that operation in terms of who's contributing to the first down calls versus the third and short versus the third and long, and you're putting together a different menu with different cooks in the kitchen, if you will. So I think that's probably the most likely outcome, is maybe they do something like that, and then from our perspective, all the names and job titles remain the same, but there's just different people having different input, and it might look a little different on game day because of that.
There's also the possibility that a combination of something like that goes on and we just never know about it.
Right, right. So yeah,
So
it's going to be, certainly Jeff is not going to throw his guys under the bus. The only scenario, I guess, that where that would be a benefit is just for somebody who's getting this promotion to sort of have the shine and
yeah.
get the opportunity. But I think that that would be less important than the damage it would do to the person who's getting the demotion. I don't think Jeff would want to make that trade-off.
And then I think we're both kind of tiptoeing around the offensive coordinator status, but I would not put the defensive, staff. I would not say that's safe too, right? Because in a lot of facets, I don't know if the defense has regressed more than the offense has, you know?
Well, they just haven't been very good for, well, I
Right,
mean, I know at least last year, a lot of the stats didn't look all that great.
right.
And there's been, even when they were at their best in this run, we were still looking at the amount of big plays they were giving up and
Yeah,
things like that. How many yards did they give up to Western Kentucky in one of those championship
yeah,
years?
that was
They had to
wild.
win like 50 to 45 or something. So it's just like as much as we respected some of the names on defense and they produced a couple conference players of the year and some things like that. You have your Rashad Wisdoms and your Trey Moores who are like holding that down and making a lot of headlines. The unit has never worked out to like an elite statistical unit unless I'm misremembering 1 or 2 years in there. Generally, they've been kind of middle at best. And so I don't know that this is such a huge departure from what we've seen.
Right, right. So I don't know. We'll see. More questions than answers, right, Greg? And I think we'll try our best to learn what we can. Greg, what do you think happens the rest of the way here? I kind of feel like there's a surprise win in here, and I think they'll win the games they're going to be favored for. So I think still 6-6 is probably the likelihood, and maybe even a seventh win.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think I would pick 6-6. And if you ask me game by game, it's probably safer to say they'll lose the next two and win the last three, but I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Tulane. And then I never would have thought I would say this, but somehow at Charlotte is like really interesting because if they haven't won it, if they unless they pull off some miracle against South Florida,
Army's always a tough matchup.
but we're talking about I'm just thinking from the trying to win on the road perspective.
Right.
Charlotte being
Yeah.
a game that like should be a total walkover, but are you really just that bad at winning a
Yeah.
game away from home in the conference season that it becomes an issue? So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic if it comes to that. And the fact that you're even thinking about that means, a lot of these games are losable where we gave them the benefit of the doubt and just penciled in a win earlier in the season. So I still have enough faith in the way that they've gotten better through seasons throughout Jeff's tenure that 6-6 feels like the best pick to me, the most likely outcome. But I know that a lot of people are feeling more negative than that right now, and I don't blame them.
Yep. I think the overall vibe here is matches kind of the state of the program. A lot of uh fans in angst. The program feels like it's in flux, and I mean over the next two weeks, I think we'll see what direction it goes, Greg. I think we hit on everything. You have anything else from North Texas? Pretty interesting.
Uh,
Rain, some rain delay. Um, yeah, I
yeah,
think
that
that's
felt
pretty
like
much
a
it.
felt like a pretty comprehensive rundown. I'm glad you got to just the overall pick of the record because that's sort of the main talking point coming away of how bad is this and what's the lasting impact. And just think we've seen that this team can rebound from stuff, and that Tulane game is just so ripe for them to jump up and get a win. But it just feels ridiculous to sit here after they just lost by whatever they lost by and say that they're going to beat one of the top teams in the conference. But somehow it feels like that's in play. So I don't know. I do think it'll just be fascinating to see how the rest of the year plays out.
I do think too, I'll throw this out there about the American. Really good conference, like pretty re very top heavy, but man, I think everybody's gonna end up beating up themselves. I mean, it's like there's two really good teams, maybe three, maybe, and I it seems like everybody else is kind of, UTSA is in the lower third, but who's in the middle? Everybody, it feels like.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes it just turns in terms of the order of how the year plays out. Like Colorado State fired their coach either today or yesterday, and
Yep.
so obviously that was built up as like this team went 8-4 last year, and I think we were
Yeah.
on here saying that they really weren't that good, and UTSA should win that game, and they barely survived it, and so that win didn't look great at the time, and it doesn't look any better looking back. But how about Temple, where they're starting to get a lot of respect now, and people think Temple's actually pretty good. So that's one that at the end of the year you might look back and say, losing on the road at Temple by 6 points because a pass got batted in the air and deflected in for an interception in the end zone is not the worst outcome, just because that's how tough things are in this league this year. But you gotta win some of those too. You have to come away with some of these tough games, or else you don't belong in that conversation.
Yep. All right, Greg, I think that'll wrap it up. We'll check back in at UTSA on Wednesday, see what Jeff Traylor has to say, and then we're on to a short week against Tulane next week. So appreciate you guys watching. Be sure to check back in. JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching, everyone.